the cells. So what are the cells? Well, the cells are the building block of all living organisms. So what living organisms we have? Well, we have animals, for example, and we have trees, right? But these are big living organisms because we also have small living organisms or tiny living organisms such as bacteria. They are also living organisms because, for example, when a bacteria goes inside a human body, it causes a disease on us, right? So then, in summary, then, yes, the cell is a building block of all living organisms, but we have big living organisms and tiny living organisms. So if we look at this, we have a large living organisms, such as, for example, humans, right? And the cells that are going to make up the human, they have to be different than the cells that are going to make up the tiny organisms because we have different sizes, for example, right? For that reason, they're going to have different characteristics as well. So if we look at these different characteristics, we have this table right here where we can see that the cells in big living organisms are going to be called eukaryotic cells, and in tiny living organisms are going to be the prokaryotic cells. In the case of the eukaryotic cells, we say we have animals and we have plants. One of the main differences between animals and plants is plants have cell wall, something that animal cells do not have. If we look at this cell right here, then this one is for the bacteria, right? For the tiny living organisms. Those are going to be prokaryotic. So the animal cell does not have cell wall. So if we look at this cell right here, which is the animal cell, and we make it a little bit larger, we can see that this cell is going to have structures inside the cell membrane. This is the cell membrane right here. And inside the cell membrane, the structures that we are going to have, they are going to be the cell organelles. These cell organelles are these ones right here. What is the name of these cell organelles inside the cell? They're going to be, for example, peroxisomes, lysosomes, mitochondria. You have other one in here, right? For example, these ones are going to be Golgi apparatus, ribosomes, etc., etc. So we have a cell membrane, and we have cell organelles inside the cell membrane. And then we also have structures outside the cell membrane. Like, for example, this one that looks like a tail, this one is going to be the flagella. In addition to that, we also have other structures that look like hairs that they are also outside the cell membrane. They are going to be called cilia. And there are some other ones that look actually like fingers like this. They look like fingers. Those are going to be villi and microvilli. So let's take a look at this in a table, which is this one right here. So we have the cell structures, and we said we have a cell membrane. What is a cell membrane made of? It's made of three main things. They are going to be carbohydrates, sugars. Carbohydrates are sugar, right? We're going to have lipids, such as what? Such as, for example, phospholipids and cholesterol. And we're going to have proteins. Then we said outside the cell membrane, as I showed you before, we're going to have flagella, that looks like a tail, cilia, look like hairs, villi and microvilli, look like fingers. And there are a couple more, but pseudopods, for example, they look like arms, but I didn't show it before because they are not actually permanent. They are not permanent. And glycocalyx is actually surrounding the cell. In other words, if the cell is a cake, then the glycocalyx is the icing on the cake. Inside the cell, we're going to have, as we mentioned, inside, we're going to have the cell organelles. And we're going to have, for example, the nucleus. Right? The nucleus controls all the cell activities because in there we have the DNA that was provided by our parents. Right? Therefore, the nucleus controls all the cell activities. We have ribosomes. They are going to synthesize proteins or produce proteins, for example. We have the rough endoplasmic reticulum. If you look in here, I mentioned conveyor belt. In the next slide, we're going to see that you're going to see the reference to this conveyor belt. I also wrote in here mitochondria, and you can see here battery. And you're going to see again in the next slide, what do I mean by this battery and the conveyor belt. So the mitochondria, as you can see here, is going to produce ATP, which is the energy that the cell needs or uses inside in order to perform the different functions that they need. So let's take a look at these cell organelles and their functions. Right here, I provided a cell with the different organelles. So right here we have the nucleus, and we said the nucleus is where the DNA is. Therefore, the nucleus controls all the cell activity. So the nucleus is going to tell the ribosome, do your job. And the ribosome is going to produce proteins. Now, these proteins are going to fall directly on top of the endoplasmic reticulum because the ribosomes are on top of the endoplasmic reticulum. The purpose of that is because when they produce the proteins can fall directly on top of the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is represented here with a conveyor belt because the job of the rough endoplasmic reticulum is actually to transport these proteins to the Golgi apparatus, which is represented here by the post office. But as you know, the conveyor belt, in order to transport the proteins, it must get energy. And this energy is provided by the mitochondria that is represented right here with the battery. The mitochondria will provide energy in the form of ATP, as I mentioned before. So then what happens with these proteins? So we said the proteins are going to be these packages or these boxes that are being transported to the post office. So what do we do in the post office with a package? Well, for example, we have a box. Then in the post office, we're going to get this box. We're going to get a Scotch tape and we're going to wrap around the box. We're going to put the address in the box. We're going to get some labels and we're going to put the labels in the box as well. We're going to put we're going to pay for the postage and we're going to put the stamps in the box, etc., etc. When the box is ready, we're going to ship it. We're going to ship it outside the cell. That should be considered international shipping. For example, hormones. Or the cell may keep the protein because the cell may need that particular protein. So that may consider as local shipping. So then what happens when the proteins are modified in the post office? Then they can be sent outside the cell, international shipping, such as, for example, hormones, or that protein can be kept inside the cell. That would be local shipping. But when you finish working with the packages and you're ready to leave the post office, you're going to end up with garbage, right? For example, the receipt that you got from paying for the postage, the excess, Scotch tape, etc., etc. So what do you do with excess Scotch tape and all these things? So with the garbage, you're going to throw it in the garbage can, which is this garbage can right here. So this garbage can is going to be the the lysosome. So what's the garbage can? That's going to be the lysosome. So for example, you have a bacteria and the bacteria goes inside the cell. So the bacteria needs to get destroyed. So how do you destroy that? The bacteria will go inside the garbage can where you're going to destroy it. So then the lysosome will destroy everything that the cell doesn't need. But the cell also produces toxic waste, right? Like in our houses, for example, we have acid or we have hydrogen peroxide. So all these things you don't throw in the regular garbage can. You need a special container to dispose of these things. Same thing in the cell. Regular garbage goes into the lysosome, right here. But in the case of toxic waste, the cell has a different container, which is going to be this container for toxic waste. And this container is going to be called what? Peroxisome. So for example, what the cell uses the peroxisome to get rid of the hydrogen peroxide, for example, that is produced sometimes in your cell. In addition to that, we have the microtubules. Look, they are tubules. Therefore, they look like bones. So these are these black tubules that you have in here, right? They're going to look like bones because they're like tubes. They're going to give the shape to the cell. They help maintain the cell shape. In addition to that, we also have centrioles. The centrioles are represented right here with a pair of scissors. Why? Because the centrioles are going to help the cell when the cell is dividing. Why that cell needs to divide? Well, for example, when we are growing, right? So let's assume that we have one cell. If we want to keep growing, we need to produce from one cell, we need to get two cells. When we have two cells, we need to produce 8 cells. So then how come the cell is able to get 2 cells from one cell and 4 cells from 2 cells? Well, that's when the centrioles are going to work, helping the cell during cell division. Okay? So what is a rough endoplasmic reticulum? The rough endoplasmic reticulum is a conveyor belt that transports proteins. But this is called rough. That's why it's called, it has the R in there. Why? Because ribosomes are on top. You can even think about this R of ribosomes with R of rough endoplasmic reticulum. We have another conveyor belt, which is this one right here. This one is called smooth because there's nothing on top of it. That's why it's called smooth. So if the rough endoplasmic reticulum deals with proteins, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum deals with lipids or fats. So let's review. What's the job of the nucleus? The job of the nucleus is to control everything that is going on with the cell. Therefore, it's going to tell the ribosomes what to do. What's the job of the ribosome? To produce the proteins. Now, what's going to happen with the proteins produced by the ribosome? They fall on top of the rough endoplasmic reticulum, which is going to transport these proteins to the Golgi apparatus, where the rough endoplasmic reticulum gets the energy in order to transport these proteins. You're going to get the energy from the mitochondria, because the mitochondria is going to produce ATP. What is it the Golgi apparatus is going to do with the proteins? They're going to modify the proteins. They're going to get it ready to be used by the cell or outside the cell. What happens with that waste? Then it will go to the lysosome. What do we do if the waste is toxic? It will go to the peroxisome. In addition to that, we have some tubes, microtubules. They are going to be the bones of the cell, so they can maintain the shape that the cell has. And the centros is represented here by a pair of scissors because the centros are going to help the cell during cell division. So let's review this with some questions. So the cell organelles, questions right here. So we have in here cell organelle provides energy. Or the energy was the battery. Which one was that? That was the mitochondria. It can be the lysosome. We said that's the garbage can. It cannot be the ribosome. That one produces proteins. Right? And the Golgi apparatus was the post office, so it can't be that one either. So the next one in here says number 2, the cell organelle. This cell organelle gives a structure and shape to the cell. Oh, shape and structure. Then that has to be the bones. And the bones, we said they are going to be the tubes right here, the tubes. So right there, therefore, the answer is going to be B. Why not letter A? Because peroxisomes, we said that's for hydrogen peroxide. That's for toxic, right? Smooth endoplasmic, that was for the lipids, we said, right? And the nucleus can be that because the nucleus controls everything that's going on in the cell. So the next one says in here, this cell organelle, modifies or processes the protein. So modifies, that's got to be where the Golgi apparatus, right? The Golgi was the post office. It cannot be the ribosome because the ribosome produces the protein. It doesn't modify them. The center is the pair of scissors, so it can be that. And we said the mitochondria is the battery, that's for energy, so it can't be that either. So the next one it says in here, this cell organelle creates or produces proteins. Oh, there you go. So the produces proteins, then it has to be letter C, the ribosome. It can be the Golgi because the Golgi modifies the proteins. It can be the lysosome because we said lysosome is the garbage can. It cannot be peroxisome because that's the garbage can for toxic waste. Next one, it says this cell organelle participates only during the cell division. Oh, that was the pair of scissors. The pair of scissors was the centriole. So this should be the answer. Centrioles. It cannot be the mitochondria. We said that's the battery. It cannot be the peroxisome because the peroxisome is for the toxic waste. And it cannot be the rough because remember we said rough with ribosomes, right? The rough is the one that transports the proteins produced by the ribosomes. So it cannot be that. So the answer for number 5 would be letter D.